Okay, welcome everybody to the Wild Dog Community Meeting. This is hosted by the Waterberg Wild Dog Initiative and the Endangered Wildlife Trust. My name is Riley Mooney and I'm the project coordinator of the Waterberg Wild Dog Initiative, and I will be kind of facilitating this meeting today. I have spoken to many of you on either email or WhatsApp or in person, so I have met most of you at one point or another, but there are a few new faces, so it's nice to see you here. Just a little bit, because this is a virtual meeting, we do have a little bit of meeting etiquette to go through. Please keep your audio off. That will just prevent the Zoom from switching to different callers while I'm trying to do the part of the presentation. And then if everybody could please put their names in the chat box, that just helps us keep a tally of attendance. And then please post your email address or your WhatsApp number in the chat box if you want to receive copies of any of the documents provided or shown at the meeting. You can also put a little message in there as well, and I'd be happy to get in touch with you after the meeting if you have any further questions. We will be sending out a community survey on either email or WhatsApp following the meeting, whichever is your preferred mode of communication. This survey is going to help us gauge a little bit more about the history of the Waterberg Wild Dog movement and about conflict that people have with the dogs while they're on their properties. So please, if you can, please fill that survey out. And we will have a question and answer section at the end of the meeting. So unless it is a very urgent question, please hold off all questions and comments until the very end. Thank you very much. Before we get started, I just want to give a really, really big thank you to everybody that tried to attend our in-person and virtual community meeting that was supposed to happen at the end of April. A special thank you to Harry and Jonathan from Silo AMS. They are doing a documentary on these Waterberg wild dogs, and so they came up and provided all of the gear and equipment that we needed to do that hybrid meeting. A special thank you to the Scion Guesthouse team for being very accommodating and understanding when ESCOM power went out, to our WWDI committee members that were able to move around their schedules and attend, and then to all of our community members that tried to attend, both in person and virtual. It was a massive disappointment that we had to postpone the meeting, but as you can see in this picture, we had a lot of gear that required ESCOM power in order to run a hybrid meeting, and we felt that it would be unfair to cancel the hybrid component of the meeting and only do a kind of brief presentation for the people that attended in person. So thank you to everybody that tried to attend that meeting, and thank you to everybody that is attending this meeting. Our agenda for today, we're just going to start with a brief introduction to African wild dogs, and then Derek from the Endangered Wildlife Trust will speak a little bit about EWT's history with the Waterberg Wild Dogs, and he'll present a little bit of historical data that they've gathered on the Waterberg Wild Dogs. And then we'll speak about the Waterberg Wild Dog Initiative's recent efforts and some data on the TOOG pack specifically since August 2020, which is when the WWDI started working with them. And then both Derek and I will speak a little bit about ecotourism potential of the Waterberg Wild Dogs, and then we'll move into a question and comment section. So, introduction to African wild dogs. African wild dogs are commonly known as painted wolves. They are the exact same species. Their scientific name is Lycaon pictus. They are most easily identified by their white flag-like tails, their large, dark kind of Mickey Mouse ears, and their very unique coloration. Particularly in the Waterberg population, we see a lot more of white in the wild dog's color, as opposed to if you look at pictures of dogs from areas in Botswana or even in Kruger. They definitely stand out here in the Waterberg. Wild dogs are very distantly related to domestic dogs and wolves. However, they are the only species within the Lycaon genus. And also they are not hyenas. It's a very common misconception that wild dogs are just a subspecies of hyenas, but they're completely different species. African wild dogs are a highly social species living in packs dominated by an alpha male and an alpha female. The alpha pair will breed at the start of the winter season, and then the pack dens while the pups are born and raised. The wild dogs absolutely live and die for their pack. They take care of the young, the sick, the weak. They help by feeding those animals first, and they definitely don't leave a pack member behind. They utilize a very, very large home range, moving and hunting in the morning and the late afternoon to avoid the heat of the day. They most commonly predate upon medium-sized ungulates, including impala and bushbuck in the Waterberg. It is not natural or typical for a pack to predate on livestock. They typically need about 2 to 3 kgs of meat per day per dog, and they can hunt 1 to 2 times a day, depending on the size of the pack and if they were successful in previous hunts or not. They are very, very well adapted to life in the bushveld, and they use their speed and stamina to chase down prey. They actually have special adaptations on their pads where their middle two toe pads are fused at the base, and this is thought to help them run through the different rocks as they move and try and hunt down prey. They have an 80% kill rate, making them very successful hunters. In comparison, lions have about a 20% kill rate and leopards have about a 40% kill rate. So wild dogs are very, very successful. How do you know if you're seeing signs of African wild dogs? This is a question that I get asked quite a bit. You'll see, if you're looking at tracks, you'll see multiple sets of tracks in the exact same area. It's not common just to see tracks from one particular wild dog and have no other tracks anywhere else. These tracks have two distinct lobes at the bottom of the pad, and you can also always see their nails in the tracks. They are most commonly confused with domestic dog tracks, jackal tracks, and hyena tracks, particularly the back foot of brown hyena up in our Waterberg area. If you are looking at a carcass, a wild dog carcass is going to be a clean carcass. They are very efficient eaters and they do not waste a lot of meat. And so those bones are going to be picked clean, like the image on this slide. This picture was actually taken of an impala that this particular pack that we'll be speaking about today predated upon near the Witkop Road, just I think last month or the month prior. There's a nice little graph at the bottom of this screen where you can compare the different size of wild dog tracks compared all the way up to lion tracks. I like to gauge in that it fits generally in this section of my hand when I'm out in the field. It's a very helpful tool to use. Conservation status. Unfortunately, African wild dogs are a globally endangered species with fewer than an estimated 6,000 remaining in the wild. This is all throughout Africa, not just South Africa. In South Africa, there are fewer than 550 adults remaining, and most of this population is in the Kruger National Park and on reserves down in KwaZulu-Natal as part of a metapopulation project. Unfortunately, wild dogs are extinct from much of their historical range throughout sub-Saharan Africa. In South Africa, wild dogs are a protected species in terms of the National Environmental Management Biodiversity Act, the Threatened or Protected Species Regulations, and in Limpopo, they are protected by the Limpopo Environmental Management Act. They are listed as a Schedule 2 and 5 species. African wild dogs are endangered due to habitat loss, habitat fragmentation, disease, and direct and indirect persecution. And recently, there has been a global conservation emphasis targeted at figuring out ways to conserve predators on private lands, not just African wild dogs. So the topics that we'll speak about today are very relevant to many different predators in all different parts of Africa as well. And now I'm going to hand things over to Derek, who's going to present a little bit about EWT's role with the Waterberg Wild Dogs.
Thank you, Riley. Just let me know if you can hear me.
Derek, we can hear you just fine.
Great, thank you. Right, Riley, that was a fantastic introduction, and I'm always very excited to speak about African wild dogs. My name is Derek Franimava. I work for the Endangered Wildlife Trust and I'm the Limpopo Regional Coordinator. And I've been doing work up in the Waterberg region since 2013. And I tell you what, at the beginning, I didn't even see a dog for about 4 or 5 years. I kept getting reports of dogs running around within the Waterberg, but it took me about 4 years to eventually see one. And it's just been fascinating, just getting more and more knowledge of these dogs and learning a lot more about them. And hopefully I'll be able to share a little bit with you today. Thanks, Riley. Next slide. Right, just to give you a bit of background, I mean, there's been a huge decrease in the range and numbers throughout Africa. Wild dogs are now extinct in a lot of countries they historically occurred in. Riley, you can just push the next button. And yeah, they're extinct in 25 of the 39 countries they previously lived in. And as you can see from the map on the right there, I mean, they are extremely fragmented. And wild dogs require huge home ranges. I've got a pack up in Limpopo that's utilizing 160,000 hectares at the moment. And they're just fewer and fewer spaces left across Africa for African wild dogs. And we're very fortunate to have them within the Waterberg. Now, the Waterberg, if you look at as a whole, it's about 1.4 million hectares, and it's one place left in South Africa where your historical predator guild is more or less still intact. And the Waterberg serves a very, very important conservation area, not only in terms of African wild dogs, but in terms of large carnivores across South Africa. It's one of the only places left where you've got lions, leopards, wild dogs, and cheetah occurring naturally. So Waterberg is also a biosphere reserve, and it's a very, very important area for carnivore conservation. But it's also a very important linkage between a lot of populations across Southern Africa. We've had records of wild dogs moving all the way from Marken all the way into Zimbabwe, into Savi Valley. So it just shows you how wide-ranging the species is. Next slide, thanks, Riley. Right, we've been collecting data on wild dog sightings since 1995. And as you can see, if you look at the black dots on the map there, that's historical sightings that have been sent through to us from 1995 to 2004. And they were quite wide-ranging, and back then you didn't have cell phones, so reports weren't as easily to come by. But you can see they were quite widespread throughout Limpopo and even in the Northwest Province. Then if you look at your sightings from 2005 to 2014, the sightings in grey, you can see they're starting to become a lot more clustered, and a lot of areas that they used to occur in, they're no longer occurring in. And now from 2015 to 2018, you can see that these sightings become even more clustered, which is rather worrying. And definitely there's been a decrease in the number of wild dogs, free roaming wild dogs in Limpopo over the last couple of decades, which is very, very worrying. Next slide, thanks, Riley. Right, as I said earlier, the Waterberg also acts as a very important corridor area. And just to tell you a little bit more about genetics, essentially you need 1,000 mammals to retain genetic integrity of a species to ensure that it'll carry on evolving and that it won't actually breed, well, essentially inbreed. And so you need 1,000 individuals. Now, even in South Africa, we don't have 1,000 wild dogs left. So essentially, if we left them as is, they would essentially go extinct, which is rather worrying. Now, Botswana has the highest population of wild dogs left in the world, with an estimated 2,000 individuals. So there's actually only essentially 1 or 2 populations left of viable wild dog numbers left that will allow wild dogs to survive into perpetuity. But the Waterberg also acts as a very important dispersal areas. We know that dogs come in from Botswana into Waterberg. They go from Pilanesberg all the way across into the Tuli area, and then all the way eventually up into Wangi and Savi Valley. It's very, very important for genetics to flow between these fragmented areas. And obviously we know that human population growth is increasing. There's more and more fences going up. So it's becoming more and more difficult for us to ensure that these isolated populations are genetically viable. Next slide. Thanks, Riley. Right, and now just wild dogs have always been in the Waterberg, and it's actually only one of 2 places that I know in the whole of Africa where we've got rock art depicting wild dog images. Now, this image over here is taken in the sort of northern part of the Waterberg, quite close to Lephalale. And it shows, as you can see, there's 2 wild dogs hunting an antelope. I was fortunate enough to go up earlier this year to see it, and I managed to take Riley with me. And the only other known rock art site depicting wild dogs is in the Irindi or Irongo area in Namibia. So it's just very, very interesting that there are these images of, and it's actually not common. There's a lot more rock art depicting other large carnivores, particularly lion and jackal, but only two sites, known sites that have wild dog images painted. Thanks, Riley. Next slide. Now, wild dogs in the Waterberg have been heavily persecuted, particularly in the last couple of decades. As you know, the price of game, particularly your color morph breeds, really increased, and we definitely noticed a decrease in wild dog numbers. But the direct threats to wild dogs are definitely direct persecution, shooting by landowners. The image on the left there was actually in Marken, taken just outside Marken in 2009, where there was a pack of dogs that were introduced from Venetia in northern Limpopo. And we were hoping that the wild dogs would stay in Marken and do very well. Because what is very concerning is, out of all of our national parks, there's only one national park that conserves our most endangered carnivore in South Africa, which is the African wild dog, and that's Kruger. There are no other sandparks reserves across the country that have wild dogs. There's a couple of provincial reserves, particularly in KZN and Northwest, and in the Northern Cape, but only one sandparks reserve has wild dogs, which is a great shame, actually. But then the image of on the right was a particular wild dog that was shot quite close to the TOOG area, quite close to Janyala Nature Reserve. Unfortunately, the story goes that this landowner thought it was a domestic dog and shot it, but it's still being investigated at the moment. But this is one of our collared individuals. And I think after the landowner noticed that the dog was collared, he was very, very worried and reported it immediately. But it's very, very sad. You know, it takes us a lot of money and expenses to get collars on these dogs. And it's very, very sad when we lose particularly a collared dog. Next slide. Thanks, Riley. Right, also traffic incidents. I mean, since I've been working in the Waterberg since 2013, I know of 9 dogs that have been killed in the Waterberg as a result of roadkill. This particular incident on the left happened earlier this year, actually more towards Steenbokpan area. Nonetheless, it's another wild dog that we've lost. And then the incident on the right actually occurred on the Beauty Road, close to Yanni Parsons' property, where actually 4 wild dogs were deliberate. We think it was deliberate, were deliberately driven over. But yeah, that was a very, very sad incident. That wild dog just in front of my vehicle there on the left was the biggest male wild dog I've ever seen in my life. And I estimate that he weighed probably close to 40 kilograms. So it was very, very sad to lose that. Next slide. Thanks, Riley. Right, just to give you some background into some of the work that we've been doing over the last couple of years, this particular incident happened in 2013. 3 wild dogs were caught in a camp in the Atherstone, near the Atherstone area in Limpopo. And the landowner said, listen, unless we came and caught these wild dogs, he was going to take care of them. So we captured these dogs and we moved them to Kruger National Park. Next slide, thanks, Riley. And it was very, very interesting. We released these dogs on the 7th of July, quite close to Kruger National Park. And in about a 2 to 3 month period, we stuck a collar on them and we tracked their movements. And it was very, very interesting. They moved in a south-westerly direction all the way to Madikwe, where they stuck around for a few days, all the way down to Mafikeng, and then back almost into Gauteng, close to Rustenburg, to Costa, back to Mafikeng, into Botswana a little bit, and all the way. Eventually, we lost signal of the collar around Madikwe Nature Reserve. But I mean, in this entire time period, they were only seen twice, according to our records. Once we in the Costa area, we actually got a photo sent to us by a farmer in Costa of these 3 African wild dogs that were on his property, and he just couldn't believe that they were there. But it just shows you the distances these wild dogs travel to look out for other wild dogs. I mean, this was a dispersal group of 3 males, and they were looking for females so they could start their own pack. But it's just incredible to see the distances that they travel and can travel and go totally unnoticed. Next slide, thanks, Riley. Right, and then on the 21st of November 2013, we also managed to collar a young male wild dog on Lephalale Nature Reserve. And next slide, thanks, Riley. Just to show you its movements. That's the area that it sort of occurred in, definitely into the Malkrofeer area. This is actually the remnants of the Malkrofeer pack, which then survived in that, well, still survive to this day in that eastern side of the Waterberg. But they went down all the way down to Interveni Nature Reserve, and that's still the core area that pack survives in today. Next slide. Right, and then also on the 11th of August 2014, a mountain biker on the 24 Rivers Road, he reported a very sick-looking wild dog. So we went and investigated, and we actually found a wild dog that was shot in the head by a low-caliber rifle. We then took this wild dog to Dr. Peter Caldwell, one of the best vets, carnivore vets in the country in Pretoria. And after a week, he managed to nurse this thing back to health. We released it back quite close to where it came from on Lindani in the Malkrofeer area. But, you know, wild dogs don't do very well on their own. And, you know, it was actually incredible. I drove this dog back to the Waterberg from Pretoria. And as I hit the Waterberg, this dog started who calling, which is a very distinctive call, almost a bird-like call that wild dogs make. That's a contact call to sort of find out where other pack members are. But as we arrived in the Waterberg, this dog started calling, and it was just incredible to witness. We released that dog, but unfortunately, it only survived for about 3 weeks. It couldn't locate its pack, and eventually we found its body on a cliff over the Lephalale River. And we think that the only thing that could have happened for this wild dog to get there was to be either killed by baboons or leopards. So unfortunately, it didn't make it. Next slide. And then also on the 27th of May, 2017, we, in the Tabazimbi area, we got notified of 3 dogs again in a black impala camp. We went to catch the dogs and released them on Lindani once again. And these dogs made their way down all the way towards Entabeni and then across to the Sterkrivier area. The last photo we got of these dogs was only 2 dogs left, and both dogs had snares on. So it just shows you there's many, many threats that wild dogs face in the Waterberg. And then after that, we never got any more sightings. But yeah, we've been collecting sightings since about 2013. Well, I have, and there was definitely a very worrying trend. I mean, the number of sightings differed, but the number of individuals sighted per sighting was definitely increasing. From 2013, you can see on average there were 8 members in each sighting, or 8 wild dogs in each sighting, and that decreased all the way to 2.15 dogs per sighting in 2017. Now, we estimated that in 2017, towards the end of 2017, there was just 5 dogs left in the Waterberg, a small group of 3 occurring in the Malkrivieer area, and then a group of 2 occurring in the Vrymansrus area. And we were very, very worried about these dogs, so we knew we had to try something else too. But you can, this also actually, if you look at it, this is the same, at the same time, the price of game was really, really increasing in the Waterberg, and a lot of large carnivores weren't being tolerated. A lot of them were being shot on sight. And we were really worried that the wild dogs were going to become extinct in the Waterberg. So, yeah, there's a necessity for us to seek alternate solutions. Next slide. Right, so we were very encouraged. Eventually, on the 15th of January, this pack of 3 managed to have a litter of pups. We had no idea where the dogs denned, and we decided, no, we had to eventually get a collar on this group and start letting landowners know where they are to try and conserve them. And that's exactly what we did. We ordered a collar and we waited for the next potential sighting. Next slide. Thanks, Riley. Now, you know, it's very important for us to collar wild dogs because, you know, we can track their movements a lot more accurately, and we can have updated GPS locations up to every hour. And it also allows us to determine wild dog home range, as well as to determine where they are denning. It also allows us to tell landowners if they don't want wild dogs around or off their property. It's an early warning system for them. So if they come towards that area and they've got animals in breeding camps and expensive game, that they can go and check that their fences are working, and also chase them off if they need to. It also allows for tourism potential, and I'll share a little bit about that later for you. I don't want to go into too much detail now, but next slide. Thanks, Riley. Right, and then eventually on the 10th of April, there was someone doing some work on one of their farms. They were capturing some game, and the wild dogs were sighted. Unfortunately, we managed to get up into the air and dart 2 dogs. One of them turned out to be the alpha male. A VHF collar was put on them, and then a satellite collar on the other dog. Next slide, thanks. Right, just to show you what goes into collaring of a wild dog, this is how we do it. I'm going to mute myself, and Riley, you can play the video. Right, it seems the video's on mute. I can't hear anything, but I'll just tell you what's going on. But yeah, essentially we call the dogs into a carcass, and then the vet darts them, preferably from a vehicle, because it's very expensive to dart from a chopper. But yeah, as you can see, the vet's taking some genetic samples here. And what's unique is the Waterberg wild dog population are actually not related to any other population across South Africa. It's very, very interesting. They're an isolated population. They've always occurred here. That's why their coat patterns are also different compared to Kruger dogs. These dogs are much darker and have a lot more white coloring compared to your low-felt dogs and other dogs across South Africa. But yeah, it's an expensive operation, and I mean, a darting operation can cost up to 90,000 Rand. So this is the collar data that we obtained from 2018 to 2019. Unfortunately, I don't have any names in that area there, but they utilized the whole Malkrofeed area. This pack was moving over 90 properties and across 95,000 hectares across the Waterberg. And effectively, we saw 5 satellite collars and followed this group quite closely for an almost, nearly a year period. But yeah, we found some very interesting data. These dogs were actually resting in high areas on koppies during the day as well as at night, and then they'd come down the valleys and hunt during dawn and dusk. And you know, it's a unique behavior. We haven't seen this amongst any other dogs across the country. So we actually suspect that it's a learned behavior from wild dogs actually avoiding humans and avoiding getting persecuted by humans. But yeah, very, very interesting. Eventually, unfortunately, we had a number of collar failures, and the alpha female actually went missing in March 2019. We don't know what happened to her, but effectively the pack split, and they split into 3. Unfortunately, when you're dealing with such small packs or, well, small numbers, very often all the pack individuals are related, as in this case, they're all related to the alpha male and female. And so when the alpha female dies, they essentially all split up so that they don't promote any inbreeding amongst themselves, and they look for other dogs to start their own new pack. So this Malkrofeed eventually pack split into 3. One group went south, one group went all the way to the Tabazimbi area, and another group went towards Lephalale, the TOOG area, where we found a pack at them, where the TOOG pack is present. Next slide. Thanks, Riley. Right, very, very interesting. You can shoot through all of those, but we've been collecting data on prey preference across the Waterberg, and it's very, very interesting. I mean, I eventually told my CCP group, the guys I work with, the Carnivore guys in the program I work in, that wild dogs had predated on an eland in the Waterberg, and none of them believed me. However, I saw it for myself. This eland was an eland female. She was heavily pregnant, but the wild dogs did manage to bring her down, possibly because she was pregnant, but everyone was in shock that a small group of wild dogs could actually predate on an eland. But generally, they predate mostly on impala, bushbuck, and interesting in the Waterberg, a lot of klipspringer. They're also very fond of red hartebeest. And yeah, to date, they actually haven't predated on any sable or roan or high value species. They have taken out a number of black impala, unfortunately, but they generally stick to smaller game. Next slide. Right, and you know, from starting to deal more with landowners, we started a WhatsApp group, much like what Riley has done in the TOOG area. And we started sending landowners locations of dogs. From that, there was a huge increased awareness about wild dogs in the Waterberg, and we were able to find a second pack. That was the Franimava, just to the west of Vaalwater. And this pack was just 2 individuals in 2018. They had a litter of pups. In 2018, they had 5 pups. Well, actually had 6 pups, 5 survived. They became a pack of 7. And in 2019, they had another litter of pups, and the pack actually became 15. 3 of the dogs disappeared. 1 was killed in a snare, unfortunately, and 1 disappeared. But this pack was predominantly using about 28,000 hectares across the Franimava area. But as the pack numbers increased, the they started to run into more and more cattle farms. And just go to the next slide, Riley. And unfortunately, that the area that they were occurring in, well, the safe area, was no longer safe, and they started predating on livestock. In total, between I think it was November and March 2019 or 2020, sorry, they predated on 33 cattle. It's highly unusual for wild dogs to predate on cattle, but once they start predating on cattle, it's a learned behavior. They find it very easy to kill cattle, and we had to remove this pack out of the area. It was actually just before lockdown last year when we decided that no, this pack was becoming, there was too much conflict going on, and a lot of air farmers in the area weren't very happy about it. And they were predating on non-natural game, which was livestock, so we had to remove this pack out of the area. Now, the Endangered Wildlife Trust relocated the entire pack, but we wanted to keep these dogs within the Waterberg, so we actually relocated the pack to Lephalale. We were very grateful to them for accepting the pack, and we removed the whole pack to Lephalale in April 2020. But yeah, so the pack found a new home in Lephalale, and you know, we had some very interesting information coming out of Australia about shock collars that were used to keep dingoes out of certain areas, and we thought we'd use the same technology on Lephalale. Unfortunately, the technology was not quite ready, but the Lephalale dogs had actually 14 pups. They had 14 pups in the boma there, 11 survived, and it was actually awesome. We managed to get cameras up at the den, and we watched these little pups grow up, and it was incredibly special watching them growing up. Riley, if you go next slide, I think there's a video I'd like to show you. Right, here's a short video. Riley, just press unmute and see if we can hear it.
Okay, let's see if it works this time.
Sorry, the videos are not great, but here you can see the pups emerging from the den for the first time, and it's incredible to see how excited the pack is. But yeah, we were very fortunate to watch these pups growing up, and very few people get to witness such young dogs. But yeah, it was incredible watching these pups go up, seeing the lions visit the boma. But let me see if you can hear the video, the audio. But yeah, wild dog pups grow up extremely quickly. They start eating meat at about 2 to 3 weeks old. So they eat their first solids at 2 to 3 weeks old. But it's incredible. A wild dog female can have a litter of up to, the record is 23 dogs. But as you can see there, at an extremely young age, the dogs already start eating meat. And they grow up very, very, very quickly. The wild dogs were fed every second day or every day. When they're in a boma, they don't expend as much energy, so their food requirements are not as great. But yeah, there you can see the lions also visited the boma. And yeah, in the wild, they face a lot of threats, particularly large carnivores. I've just lost an alpha female up in northern Limpopo. She was killed by spotted hyena or leopard last week. So unfortunately, all her pups also died. But yeah, it was incredibly special watching these puppies grow up on Lephalale, and we were hoping that Lephalale would be a success story and these dogs would find their forever home on Lephalale. And we're extremely grateful to Lephalale for taking on this burden. Or I don't know if I can call it a burden, but it's a lot of work and effort has to go into to looking after dogs into a boma. And they spent nearly a year or over a year in the boma there. And we're incredibly thankful for them feeding them and keeping them alive. But yeah, next slide. Thanks, Riley. Eventually, once the pups were big enough, we released them onto Lephalale. And this is, they did very, very well. I mean, unfortunately, they kept breaking out. I wish you could see this video. Please go and find it on YouTube. But this is incredible footage of wild dogs chasing 2 leopard in the Waterberg. We were up in a chopper actually chasing the dogs back to Lephalale because they kept escaping out of the reserve. But this is the alpha female actually chasing 2 leopards away from her pups to keep her pups safe. And it's incredible to see how fearless this wild dog is and how close it gets. Unfortunately, the video is a bit staggered, but please go and look at this footage on YouTube. It's incredible to see this wild dog harassing this fully grown female leopard here, and it chased her cub away previously. But she really gets close to this leopard. She bites it on the tail once or twice, actually, and it's just incredible to see how fearless they are. Now, I've been in the Waterberg a couple of times, and a number of landowners have told me how they've seen these Waterberg wild dogs chasing leopards into trees. And it's very important to have them as well, because, I mean, they also regulate numbers of leopards in certain areas and chase them out of certain areas. So those landowners who think that wild dogs are a nuisance and just predate on the animals, they're occurring across huge areas across the Waterberg, and the effect on a property is actually not as big as many people seem. And yeah, they do also give the other predators in the area a lot of grief, but it was incredible to witness them, this alpha female chasing these leopards in the Waterberg, and how fearless she was. Next slide. Thanks, Riley. But yeah, eventually we released the dogs in October 2020. Unfortunately, they broke out of the reserve 5 times in 6 weeks. And in the 6 weeks that they were out, eventually the alpha male was killed by a lion on the reserve. So unfortunately, because when they broke out, they continued predating on livestock. Unfortunately, this pack had this learned behavior to hunt livestock now, and the decision was taken to move the pack back into the boma. Next slide. Right, the current status of Waterberg wild dogs. The Lephalale has 3 adults and 11 yearlings. 2 females have already been relocated to Gorongosa, and they've been confirmed pregnant already. So we're looking forward to seeing some pups from those 2 females, and then 4 males are going to Katuda 12, and then also 9 of those males will be relocated to Malawi. The Malkrofie currently consists of 2 groups of 4 adults. One group using the area around Lephalale, and one group using the area around Witwater, closer to Entebeni. And then the TOOG group currently consists of 4 adults and 5 yearlings. They'll be denning any day now, so we're looking forward to seeing where they den, and hopefully we'll have some more pups this year. They had 7 pups, but it looks like we lost 2, unfortunately. And then around Vaalwater and Hermanusdorings, there's a group of 3 individuals that's been sighted from time to time. And then, yeah, what's quite exciting, we've had 6 known litters that have been born since 2017. Next slide. Right, the TOOG pack, I won't go into too much detail because this is the pack that Riley's been looking after. She's done an absolutely sterling dog. But essentially, we got a report of an injured dog crossing the R33 between Vaalwater and Ellesras. And we got a whole lot of landowners in the area together so that we could find out what's going on. Thanks to extensive search, we were able to find the dogs, and we managed to get a collar on this beautiful male here. Unfortunately, the collar stopped working recently, but we determined that there were 4 adults and they had 7 pups. We're not sure where they did last year, but it was encouraging that 11 dogs are now living in that area. Next slide. Right, this is our collar data that we have from the Waterberg, collected since 2018. And it's very, very interesting to see that we've actually got 3 main packs, and that the packs don't go into each other's areas. In the south there, that was the Freymans risk group. In the sort of north eastern area, that was the Malkrofie group that we had collars on at den in 2018. And then in the Ellis Russ area, the TOOG area towards the Nyala, there's the TOOG or Witkop pack. So as you can see, wild dogs don't utilize they have strict territories which they stick to, and essentially they don't overlap with each other. Next slide. I just wanted to show you some very interesting information. Obviously, we managed to collar a dog earlier last year to late last year, and they were utilizing the TOOG or Witkop area, but actually we collared a wild dog in 2018 in the Malkrofeed area. And unfortunately, that Malkrofeed pack, the alpha female died and the pack split, and a group of females moved into the TOOG or Lephalale area, Witkop area, and they've been utilizing the exact same area that they've always been in. So, and you know, we've had so few sightings from that area in 2018, 2019, yet the wild dogs were there. The reason why we could get this information is we collared the dog in the Malkrofeed area, but about 3 months after we collared it, the collar stopped working. But someone from Tolo in the Witkop area found an old wild dog collar on their property. We took it into AWT, who tried to get all the data out, and amazingly enough, that collar carried on collecting data, although it wasn't sent through. But yeah, we were able to see that those dogs have been in the exact same area for the last 3-4 years. Next slide. Just want to tell you about some interesting individuals. This was the alpha male of the Malkrofeed pack. He's about 8 years old, which is the oldest dog we know in the Waterberg. His name is Waterwater, very, very white individual. But yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. We've got camera trap images of this dog all the way in the Malkrofeed area, as well as on Schwebi, right in the north of the Waterberg, and actually in 2019 or 2020, oh, no, it was 2019, we got a camera trap image of the same dog all the way at Murataba, close to Marakele. So it just shows you how amazing this dog has been. He's utilized the entire Waterberg area, and yeah, the last sighting we had of him was on a property quite close to the Beauty Road, and it was yeah, it was sent through to us in February last year. We haven't had another sighting of him, but incredible dog, raised at least 2 litters. This was go back to next slide. Thanks, Riley. This is Lindani, the alpha female of the Malkrofeed pack. She had a completely black tail, which is highly unusual for wild dogs. They've usually got a white tip tail, but yeah, unfortunately, she went missing early in 2019. We're not sure what happened to her, but she had a litter of pups in 2019, and a lot of her offspring still survive today. Next slide. This is Lephalale. Unfortunately, this dog was shot in the TOOG area in 2019, actually, but is one of Lindani's offspring, and a beautiful, beautiful dog, unfortunately. Next slide. This is Wildefuffie, the first dog we ever collared in the Vryman's Rus area. Lovely dog. We followed his movements for nearly 2 years. But unfortunately, he was caught in a snare in the area that he resided in. And you know, it was very, very interesting because his collar was running out of battery. And the only reason we ever found his body was because he was caught in the collar. Unfortunately, we stopped getting readings from his collar about 2 weeks prior to when he was caught. And eventually the buildup of maggots around his neck from where the snare was actually increased the heat on the collar, and it managed to send out a few more locations. We went to investigate, and unfortunately we found that he'd been killed in a snare. So rather interesting, but very gory story. But yeah, let me leave it at that. And yeah, it's been a very interesting journey, I must be honest. It's been fascinating to get more insight into these wild dogs' lives. And we definitely have a lot more knowledge now than we did back in the early 2010s. And yeah, we're able to better manage these wild dogs now and understand a little bit more what's going on. But yeah, we'd like to keep them safe, and like to continue working with landowners to keep wild dogs within the Waterberg. And there's many ways we can do that. We'll chat a little bit later about it. But yeah, I'll leave it there. Thanks, Riley.
Great. Thanks so much, Derek. Thank you for that presentation. You have an absolute wealth of information when it comes to the Waterberg Wild Dog, so it's wonderful to hear from you. I'm going to present a little bit about the Waterberg Wild Dog Initiative and about our efforts since August 2020 now. So the Waterberg Wild Dog Initiative came from a concept first discussed during a meeting with Waterberg stakeholders and the Endangered Wildlife Trust at the end of July 2020. It was decided in this meeting that there needed to be an on-the-grounds organization to help out the Endangered Wildlife Trust achieve their conservation goals in the Waterberg. And we also needed a community-based organization to provide a communication channel between the Waterberg community and the conservation groups that are working with these dogs. So because of this, the Waterberg Wild Dog Initiative was founded on August 13th, 2020. Our structure is such that we have a project coordinator, that is myself, and then I am guided by a steering committee consisting of prominent Waterberg community members. Our chairman is Michael Emberton of the TOOG area. Our vice chairman is Andre Berger from Vaalwater Game Reserve. And then other committee members include Herman Mueller from Lephalale Wilderness, Piet Hennig from Tswana Lodge, Derek from the EWT, and Reinhard Heuser from Niati Wilderness. And you can see us in this picture here. This is when we collared one of the dogs on Tolo at the start of this year. So Mike is on the right of the screen, and then we have myself, and then Piet, and then his grandson Graham, who has also been heavily involved in the initiative since day one. The Waterberg Wild Dog Initiative operates underneath Waterberg Tourism NPC. Waterberg Tourism NPC uplifts the community by using tourism to promote the development of different sectors within the greater Waterberg region. So its structure is such as follows on the screen here. The Waterberg Wild Dog Initiative is actually the first conservation project to operate underneath Waterberg Tourism NPC. And our objectives are to spread awareness about the Waterberg wild dogs, really to help shine some light on these elusive animals, to gain accurate information about the Waterberg wild dogs' numbers, their movements, diet, behaviors, life history. As you can see from a lot of the information that Derek presented, a lot of the things that we're finding are very, very unique for African wild dogs. And so there's a lot still unknown about the Waterberg wild dogs. And then we also want to educate and work with community members to protect and conserve the Waterberg wild dogs. Because our initiative is a community-driven initiative, we work very much on the grounds, one-on-one with the individual landowners. And then we also want to develop and promote the ecotourism potential of the Waterberg wild dogs, which is something that Derek and I are going to get into at the end of the meeting. Okay, and then a little bit of data on this TOOG pack since August 2020, which is the pack that is in the area where most of, I believe, our attendees reside. We first managed to place a collar on this pack on August 28th, 2020. So it was only about 2 weeks after our initiative was started. So we really hit the ground running. As Derek mentioned, we were able to place a collar on this pack because somebody in the community reported seeing a dog crossing over the R33. The dog was coming from the eastern TOOG area, crossing west over the R33, almost towards the Bavarians group. This is the first time that this TOOG pack has been monitored. As Derek mentioned, they did have that tracking collar on the dog that was found, but before then, we had no idea about this pack's movements in the area. And we really, really could not have achieved placing a collar on this pack without the assistance of our community members reporting sightings and helping get out there and track the dogs. I want to give a very special shout out to Graham, who's the young man that I showed on a previous slide. He went out there almost every single day for about 10 days to track the dogs and monitor their movements while we were able to get a collar up to put on the pack. So this is a video that I'm just going to show you guys. This was sent to us by landowners in the area when the dogs were first sighted. And this is the kind of sighting that really sparked us to put a collar on this pack and to get out there tracking the dogs. This video also alerted us to the fact that there were young dogs in the pack, which previously we had no idea. One, that there were different sexes in the pack. We thought that originally the pack that was in this area was a single sex pack. And then so we did not know that they were a breeding pack or that they had successfully denned last year. So this video gave us a lot of information about this pack structure before we were able to put that collar on the dogs. And then after we placed the first collar on the pack, we found out a little bit more information about the pack. There were 11 dogs seen at that time, so the end of August 2020, 4 adults and 7 pups. We believe that some of the dogs may have dispersed from a larger pack in the Lephalale area, but there's still a lot unknown about where these dogs came from. But finding this pack added 11 dogs to South Africa's known wild dog population, so that was a huge, huge, huge win. And it's an incredibly important pack as it is the only known breeding pack remaining in the Waterberg. The second collar that's on the pack was placed on January 23rd while the dogs were on Tolo Bush Lodge, which is just off of the Witkop Road. During this count, there were only 9 dogs counted in the pack, 4 adults and 5 pups. This collaring was done in the middle of summer, whereas our first collaring was done in the middle of winter, and so the bush was a lot thicker. So it is possible that we missed counting 2 pups, but it also is likely that we lost 2 pups in the meantime. But we managed to place a collar on a second healthy adult male. Both males that were collared are actually quite large wild dogs, which is really awesome and beautiful to see. So since the end of August, the pack has utilized a total of 42,000 hectares or 420 square kilometers. They've been on at least 38 different properties ranging in size from 100 hectares up to 12,000 hectares. They're typically favoring mountainous, rugged terrain where they can go undetected, and we actually get very, very few reported sightings of this pack, even while the dogs are on properties and the landowners know that the dogs are in the area. Since we placed the first collar on the pack, I created a WhatsApp group that currently has over 70 community members in the area, and I share updates about the pack's movements and general information about the wild dogs on this group. It's been a really, really great group, and it's helped give an early warning mechanism that allows landowners to take steps to mitigate potential conflict when they can see that the dogs are either on their property or moving into the area. And then they can also go out and try and see the dogs while the dogs are passing through. In addition to this WhatsApp group, I also have been privately alerting community members while the dogs are either on their property or very, very close to their property. So I have spoken to a lot of you one-on-one as well. So this is, my apologies for the poor map quality on these maps, but this is kind of showing the general land usage area of this pack since the end of August. This data is pooled from 2 different collars, so increased pins in an area does not necessarily correlate to increased usage. There are also more pins when we change the collar settings as well. So particularly when we were trying to place another collar on the pack, we had the first collar sending more pins, that way we could reliably find the pack. So again, this is just kind of showing the magnitude and the size of area that these dogs are using. And then their diet, we've had very few reports of predation since we began monitoring the pack. The only confirmed reports include 4 impala, 1 bush pig, which is actually very, very rare for wild dogs. I've only found one other record of wild dogs predating on a bush pig in all of the literature that I've searched, and then 1 blue wildebeest. This picture was taken of one of the impalas that this pack had killed. And then we have received reports of the pack predating on kudu, small giraffe, zebra, and blesbok. However, these reports were not confirmed by WWDI, but we do still take record of these reports. And then their movements from January 2021 to early April 2021. During this 3.5-month period, the pack's range actually shrank down to only 6,600 hectares, predominantly on only 3 different properties, which is highly, highly unusual for African wild dogs. We don't have any evidence that the dogs were denning. We didn't see any signs of pups, and they didn't seem to choose any particular spot on properties. They just weren't moving very far during the day. And so the cause of this is relatively unknown. We believe it was influenced in part by the heavy rainfall that we received during late January and early February. As I'm sure all of you are aware, that rainfall made it almost impossible for us to move around. The rivers were flowing very, very fast. And we think that the dogs had a lot of difficulty trying to cross the different rivers during that time period. But also the area that they were using was very, very remote, and they had very little human interference on a day-to-day basis. They probably weren't seeing even any vehicles driving around, so they really didn't feel too disturbed to move off. So again, this just shows their smaller home range size, 6,600 hectares over a 3.5-month period, predominantly on these 3 different properties. Property 1 was 12,000 hectares in size. The dogs utilized this property 57% of the time during this 3.5-month period. Property 2 is 2,000 hectares. They were on this 22% of the time. And then property 3 was 1,000 hectares, and they were on this 14% of the time. During this time period, I worked very, very heavily with the different landowners and the management staff in this area extensively to try and mitigate conflict. I was sending them daily location updates to let them know exactly where the pack is on the property. That way we can go out and try and physically chase the dogs out of the area, try and disturb the area a lot more by driving around, honking the horn, just making a lot of noise in the area. We also gave out some advice regarding anti-predation techniques for breeding camps. And then the thing that worked the best was actually placing lion scat to stimulate the presence of lions in the area. And this was the last solution that we tried. This innovative lion scat approach, we assisted in the deliberate placement of lion scat to stimulate the presence of lions, African wild dogs' natural predator. Wild dogs have a very, very acute sense of smell. And so we were hoping that if we can make it seem like there are lions in the area, the dogs will move out of the area. This strategy has been trialed before with African wild dogs, but it's only been used in creating bio boundaries. So a solid line where you place scat very, very heavy in a solid line to prevent the dogs from either entering a breeding camp or keeping them away from cattle crawls, things like that. So this was the first time that we tried to do something like this over about 6,600 hectares, but because those properties were larger, we were trying to figure out ways that we could get the dogs away from about 15,000 hectares total. So as you all can imagine, trying to create a bio boundary around 15,000 hectares is going to be nearly impossible. So we tried a different method. This method was adaptive, targeting the most specific spots and areas most frequently utilized by the dogs. And we would go out to those specific GPS coordinates and we'd drop scat at those places. And so I did this with the community 4 times in the area over 3 weeks, and it was successful each time in getting the dogs to leave the immediate area. So yeah, as you can see in these pictures, it's not a very glamorous job, but it worked quite well. We had a lot of lion scat that we placed over these properties during that time. So the first time we placed the scat up in the north part of this picture here, and then afterwards, over the next few days, the dogs ran 9 kilometers southwest. The second time we placed it in this western part of the picture, and then after that, the dogs ran 5 kilometers northeast. The third time we placed it along the Witkop road up here, and then after that, the dogs ran 5 kilometers south. And the fourth time we placed it kind of in this eastern part of the picture, and the dogs ran 5 kilometers west. After this, we didn't try doing it anymore because we didn't want the dogs to become habituated to this fake lion presence, and we wanted to see what their reaction would be. After this fourth time, this was actually the first time that the dogs had been off of these 3 particular properties in, I believe, about a 3-month period. So that was very, very exciting to see them move out of that immediate area. This data that we were able to collect from placing this lion scat is really, really unique. It may not seem like much when these dogs only ran 5 kilometers west, but in the few days prior to us spreading the scat, we were lucky if the dogs even moved about 1 kilometer from their area. So going from a 1 kilometer per day movement to a 5 kilometer movement is actually quite big for this pack. And then since then, on Friday, April 16th, the dogs actually began moving into new areas and moving more like typical wild dogs, where they were moving very, very large distances over every day, moving about 6 kilometers a day, and then only staying on properties for about 1 to 3 days. So we were finally happy. We were saying that the dogs are more like normal wild dogs now. But most recently, the pack movements have actually slowed, and we believe that this is because the alpha female may be pregnant and the pack may be looking for a den site to raise pups. So we're keeping our fingers crossed that she's able to successfully find a good den site and have her pups, and everybody remains safe and healthy. Okay, so now Derek and I are going to talk a little bit about the ecotourism potential of the Waterberg Wild Dogs. This is one of the aims of our Waterberg Wild Dog Initiative, and it is something that Derek has been working on in this area for a very, very long period of time as well. Having free-roaming African wild dogs in the Waterberg does create a very, very unique ecotourism opportunity for the Waterberg community. I mean, nowhere else in South Africa are free-roaming African wild dogs so accessible from Johannesburg. The Waterberg is only about a 2 to 3 hour drive from Johannesburg and about a 1 to 2 hour drive from Pretoria. So it's a perfect place for just a weekend getaway. And how amazing would it be if people could come up into the Waterberg to see free-roaming African wild dogs rather than going to Kruger or even into Botswana or other parts of Africa where you can see these dogs. And then also a large portion of the Waterberg community's income already stems from some sort of ecotourism, whether that's photographic safaris, even hunting. There's a lot of properties in the Waterberg that are commercial. The biggest potential for doing successful ecotourism with the free-roaming African wild dogs is going to be during the dogs' denning season. During this denning season period, the wild dogs are going to remain stationary around a den site while they raise their pups, and there's a huge potential of earning significant income from a successful den site ecotourism, and the EWT has shown this. So I'll hand it over to Derek now to give a little bit of data on this.
Thanks, Roddy. Yeah, you know, it all depends where the dogs den. I think that's the big thing. But in 2018, we had a model where we wanted to show that you know, there's a big saying in a lot of wildlife properties in the Waterberg, if it pays, it stays. So we really wanted to show that it is possible for wild dogs to generate an income. And in 2018, we had the opportunity to do this. The wild dogs den on a property, what was it called? the name's gone out of my head. Sorry, it was a while ago. But they denned in the Malkrofir area, and you know, if animals can generate an income, people are more inclined to let them stay. So this is where they denned and one thing I just want to let you know about the denning season. Generally, when wild dogs den, they are stationary for 10 to 14 week period. And after 10 weeks, they start moving the pups a little bit and a little bit further to eventually when the pups are able to live a nomadic lifestyle again and keep up with the pack. But next slide there. Right. In order for wild dogs us to create any income, we need obviously buy-in from the landowners where the wild dogs are denning. And yeah, as Riley said, you know, there are very few places in South Africa to see wild dogs at a den, and there's huge tourism benefits that can be reached. People spend their lifetime, well, photographers wanting to photograph wild dogs or wild dog pups, and it's a fantastic opportunity if they do den on your property to create this opportunity and to create income out of it. There's a lovely paper on ecotourism by Peter Lindsay, which I encourage people to look to, just to show you how much wild dogs cost throughout a year and how much they can money they can bring in. But through the use of collars, we're able to determine exactly where they are denning, and we're able to take landowners in, and that's exactly what we did in 2018. Next slide. Right, this is the 3 properties. They den on a property called Khokong. Over a 2-month period, we were able to bring in 177 guests, and this is the first time we ever trialed this. We'd never done it before. We put out adverts on social media, and it very quickly gained traction. I think we charged each guest 550 Rand for the experience, and of the there was only one group of guests that weren't able to see wild dogs. But it was absolutely fantastic. You know, the whole Waterberg community brought into the project. We had 41 carcasses that were donated by the local Waterberg community. And this allowed us to show the guests wild dogs. So, but also by donating carcasses, we're reducing the impact that the wild dogs would have had on the surrounding properties. So essentially, we took a carcass in almost every afternoon. We took some tourists in. We called the wild dogs in. The wild dogs came in and fed on the carcass. That their effect on the property where they would have hunted in any case wasn't as great. And we showed 177 guests the dogs, and it was incredible, truly incredible experience. People were able to see these wild dogs up close, feeding on a carcass, and it was enjoyed by many people. And a lot of people actually came 2 or 3 times. And, you know, we had very little time to advertise this, but I mean, in total, we generated 81,000 Rand in a 6-week period. 41 carcasses were donated by the local community, and we managed to contain the pack just to 3 properties throughout the denning season. Next slide. Right. However, we decided how are we going to split the income between the 3 properties, and it was decided that the amount of time that each dog spent on each property, we would be able to determine how we split the income. I would change that going forward. We did learn a lot, but essentially the property where the dogs denned, the dogs spend most of the time there, so they benefited from most of the tourism. Next slide. Well, most of the income. Next slide. Right, and you can see in July and August, we managed to generate over 80,000 Rand, and the funds were split accordingly as we agreed to before the denning season. And next slide. And also the carcasses were donated by the local landowners, and we managed to feed them 41 carcasses throughout the denning period. It was a hell of an effort to get carcasses from the relevant landowners, but we managed to arrange a cold room, store the carcasses, and we fed the dogs on a daily basis. Now, next slide. Right, we also, after the denning season, the EWT committed to donating 90 head of game for allowing the dogs to den successfully, and the funds were sourced by the Elizabeth Wakeman Henderson Foundation, and we fed. There were 5 feeding locations around the den site, and how we decided to split the number of game donated was about the amount of hunts that these dogs went on during the denning season. And, you know, we put a think it was actually a 500-meter buffer around the den. And each time the dogs moved outside that 500-meter buffer, we counted as a hunt. And essentially, the wild dogs moved outside of the buffer on 31 occasions during the entire denning period. Next slide. And we determined that the fairest way to distribute the game was a percentage of these movements further than 1 kilometer from the den. So essentially, there were 12 movements on a property called Inque. So 38% of the game was donated to them. On Hukong, there were 15 movements. Half of the game was donated to them, and the remainder of the 90 individuals, 4 movements were donated to Halali. So in total, EWT donated 35 impala to Inque, 43 impala to Hukong, and 12 impala to Halali. And you know, it was much more animals than the actual than the dogs hunted, and it was very, very successful. The landowners were happy with that. So yeah, I don't know, let me just touch on it briefly. Essentially, I mean, it is very, very possible to create income. And, you know, we learned a lot from the first time that we trialed this back in 2018. In 2019, unfortunately, the microfeed pack didn't den again, so we weren't able to do it. But there was a pack that denned at Fremant's Riss in 2019, but they were denning on a hunting property, and the owners were quite happy for them to den there, and essentially didn't want to create any additional income. However, when they weren't hunting on the property, we did manage to take a number of guests to see the wild dogs, and they had a fantastic experience, and they created some income for the property. And yeah, it was quite well received. But yeah, let me not go on too much about that, but Riley, you can carry on.
Thank you, Derek. So yes, in a nutshell, the model concept that we're presenting for ecotourism potential of the Waterberg Wild Dogs is creating a model where tourists are able to come and visit the wild dog den site. And then the income generated from having those tourists see the dogs is then divided between the properties hosting the dogs during the denning season. So essentially the dogs help pay for their own protection during this vulnerable time where they're raising their pups and where they're really predating heavily on a few individual properties. And then just outside of the denning season as well, there is still ecotourism potential of having the Waterberg Wild Dogs around. Particularly if you have a guest lodge within the Waterberg Wild Dogs range, you should really market it as being within free roaming wild dog range. Even if the dogs aren't necessarily on the property, it is a really, really wonderful marketing point that you can hit with a lot of tourists by saying that they are within free roaming wild dog range. So there is the possibility that the dogs do move through the property when they are there. But then also the information that we receive from these GPS tracking collars on the dogs can be used to increase the chances of guests being able to see the wild dogs, because now we can let landowners know when the dogs are on their property. So if you do have guests that are staying on your property while the dogs are on your property, then definitely go out and drive around in the area where the dogs are and try and get your guests to see the wild dogs. It's an absolutely incredible experience that those guests are absolutely never going to forget. And then just in general, we want to promote the Waterberg as being home of the free roaming Waterberg wild dogs. There's a lot of people in the Waterberg that also don't even know that there are free roaming wild dogs in this area, or how rare it is to have free roaming wild dogs around. So again, the wild dogs can help pay for their protection via this ecotourism potential, but it goes beyond just the properties hosting the dogs during the denning season. Nearby lodges can also market accommodation if these den site ecotourism excursions are done. Shops in the area received increased tourist traffic, etc. We just bring more people into the Waterberg for ecotourism, and the whole Waterberg community is able to benefit. But we really, really need the support of the community in order to make this a successful operation. So then there's just one video that I want to share quickly. This video was taken during the 2018 denning period while the dogs were denning in the Marken area. So this is just an example of what's possible to see when wild dogs are denning. My apologies if you weren't able to hear the audio in that video. The audio is coming through on my screen, so I'm not able to figure out why it's not coming through to everybody else. But again, it's a really, really beautiful video, and it was taken during that denning season. And so it does show the possibility of what you can actually see if you do wild dog ecotourism. And there are a lot of photographers, both international photographers and photographers that are in South Africa that would absolutely love to shoot wild dogs, photograph wild dogs at a den site just like that. So Derek, I'll hand it over to you just to wrap up.
No, great, thanks, Franny. Yeah, so essentially, you know, we're very, very blessed to have the wild dogs in the Waterberg. There are very few places in South Africa where they occur, and you know, not many people know they're Africa's second most endangered carnivore. We've only got 550 wild dogs left in South Africa, and you know, we don't actually have any space left for them. There's only 13 reserves in South Africa with the wild dogs. And, you know, actually, there's nowhere for these dogs to go. So they've always found the Waterberg as a home, and we'd like to keep the Waterberg a home for the wild dogs. We're actually blessed to have them there. They do have an effect on the landowners, but, you know, they also, what a lot of people don't realize, they keep prey populations healthy. They feed on the old and the sick. They keep disease away. They are also many tangible benefits for having wild dogs within the Waterberg. And it'll be a very, very sad day, the day we don't have any wild dogs left in the Waterberg. I think it's a fantastic opportunity. If the dogs do get on your property, I think you're very, very fortunate. You're in a fortunate position to contribute towards wild conservation on a global scale. I mean, these dogs are very, very important. Their genetics are unique. Their coat patterns are beautiful. We should really go to every effort that we can to conserve these dogs. And they will be denning soon. We hope they're denning on a safe property, and we hope we can showcase the dogs, teach the local people about them. I mean, in the 2018 denning season, I'll never forget, I had people who despised water dogs. They used to just see carcasses on their fence lines and hated them. I took them to view these dogs, and they totally changed their perceptions. They become some of the biggest advocates of the wild dogs within the Waterberg, and we're very fortunate to have them. So, you know, the community will buy, and they love these dogs. We'll get carcass donations. We'll make sure that the effect on your property isn't as great as it would be. And, you know, I think utilize the WWDI. They've been doing a fantastic job. Give them the opportunity to come in and have a look and see what's happening, to bring tourists in. And we can really create something special in the Waterberg. I think the wild dogs should be a face of the Waterberg, and we should definitely try and get the whole community to support them, and outside let everyone else know about them, because no one knows about them. So yeah, I think WWDI is doing a fantastic job. Please support them, guys. Riley, thank you for all of your hard work over the last year, and yeah, we're looking forward to see what happens over the next coming months. Yeah, just to let you know, we're now sitting at 34 known resident wild dogs in the Waterberg, and obviously I don't want there to be too many, but you know, we're in a better position to make decisions about these dogs. And obviously we'd like to continue to work with farmers and keep it a safe haven from where predators and farmers can both prosper. But yeah, that's it from my side. Thank you very much.
Great stuff. Thank you so much, Derek. Thank you for wrapping up. So now we'll move into the Q&A and discussion section of the presentation and of the meeting. So please, because we are doing this in a virtual way, if everybody could just raise their hands if they have a question, or you can post questions in the chat box as well. And we'll try and get to everybody's questions. And if we aren't able to get to your question as well, I'm also happy to arrange a phone call with you or a one-on-one meeting where we can continue talking about some of the things that we presented today. So we do have members of our WWDI committee here as well who are going to be helping answer questions. So if anybody has any questions, please go ahead.
Riley Kenmord here. Well done to you and Derek. I think it was an excellent presentation. If people don't understand the importance and the necessity of having wild dogs, there's something wrong. I think you've explained everything extremely well. And I think this is a natural resource, a very scarce animal, as Derek has said, and everything needs to be done to bring the community together to make sure that we protect them for future generations. Thank you for an excellent presentation.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
Hi, Riley. It's Irma speaking.
Hi, Irma.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you okay.
Okay, and you can't see me. Maybe now you can see me. Oh, sorry, I'm sitting in the office. Riley, I think you must, your presentation was wonderful, and I really hope that it gives everyone in our area a bit more insight, and so that we can work along with it. Being a photographer myself, that is really something that we should try and explore and really push. If I tell you how much I have paid for these photography trips, it's horrendous, you know, and we can also do that as a community project, give accommodation, plus take them out to the denning area where they can see the wild dogs and pay. We can set up like a little package. So I think
It's Irma.
Yeah.
Nick and Irma. Yeah.
Okay, you can hear me. All right. So that is really something that I think has got huge potential. I mean, that photograph of the wild dog that I showed you, I took at Mana Mana pools in Zimbabwe. And, you know, you just don't get the opportunity to photograph the wild dogs. It's really so scarce.
Yes,
so that's something, and we are always willing to help out with accommodation. We've got accommodation if we can set up little projects like that. If you find out where the denning is I'm in touch with Shem Compion of C4 Safaris, photograph safaris. And Shem will set up something like that and get the people to come. So hopefully they den somewhere where one can take pictures of them and use that. And then that could also be a way of getting some money. You can send the wild dogs a letter and tell them they can come and den on our farm. Okay.
Thank you, Irma. Thank you very much. And I do agree that if the dogs are able to den on a safe property, and if we can do these ecotourism excursions with the dogs, it does benefit the entire community, because just like you said, you can sell a package where even if they den on a property that doesn't normally do ecotourism, we can bring in outside companies that can help facilitate that ecotourism. We can offer accommodation at the neighboring lodges. People can eat at the restaurants in the area and everything. So it will just benefit the entire community to have an ecotourism excursion with wild dogs. And thank you very much for being willing to host the dogs during denning season. I wish it was that easy that we could just move them over there, but unfortunately,
just tell them to go there.
These are wild animals, so yes.
Contact me and I'll put you in touch with Shem Compion of C4 Safaris, and he'll be more than willing to help set up photographic safaris for that once it comes to that.
Great. Thank you, Irma.
Thanks, Riley, and thank you for all your
Can
work.
I jump in there? That's a fantastic contact, Irma, and I know Shem Compion has taken the most wonderful wildlife images, and I bet he'll be very, very excited to jump into something like that, because if you ask Shem personally, there's a very few places in South Africa where you can have the opportunity unless you're paying 20,000 Rand a night. So, you know, I'm sure Shem will jump on it. His followers will definitely all come have a look.
Look, I know Shem very well. And actually, we were planning that Shem comes to the farm for a weekend to come and look at maybe hosting some landscape or night sky photography at the farm. And then the flood came and the roads washed away. So we had to cancel the weekend. But I'm going with Shem again now in a couple of weeks, 3 weeks' time. I'm going to do a landscape course with him in the Witkop Nature Reserve. And I'll have a chat to him and, you know, we'll set something up.
Definitely. Thanks, Irma. That'll be great.
Okay, Derek. Stay well and thank you for all your effort.
Okay, does anybody else have any questions that they'd like to ask the committee while we're here? Johan, I see your hand is raised.
Yes, thank you. I'm the owner of Lala Salama, and I know these wild dogs has been on the farm on and off, and we are very supportive of this, so we don't have any problem with that. Will you please send us, if possible, the presentations you've made? Thank you very much for that. It was very informative, and I truly believe we should utilize this wild dogs as a marketing opportunity for the Waterberg as well. This is quite a unique opportunity we have. And I would like to see if we can play a role in promoting this wild dogs in the Waterberg as an ecotourism event. So thank you for that. If possible, we would like to receive the presentations. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely, Johan. Thank you very much. I will definitely send that through to you, and it's great to have your support. I really appreciate that. Does anybody else have anything that they want to add as well?
Ronnie, maybe before we lock off, it'll be fantastic if you can make this available on the Facebook page. I see you have recorded it for anyone who wasn't at the meeting. Unfortunately, we were hoping for a bigger turnout, but I think everyone's got a bit of Zoom and Teams fatigue. But just for the people that did join, thank you so much. We really, really appreciate it. And please, we do have open telephone lines that you can contact us. And yeah, it'll be fantastic to really start showcasing the Waterberg Wild Dogs. They're very, very special, unique. And lastly, I just want to really thank WWDI's effort. I must be honest, EWT was struggling with our capacity to do as much as we could in the Waterberg, and WWDI has definitely come to the party and been fantastic on the ground, helping community members. And you know, if you don't want the wild dogs on your property, that's also not a problem. We can work together to get them off your property. It's all about working together, and I think that's the only way we're going to conserve these dogs going forward. So from EWT, thank you very much, WWDI, and thanks to all the landowners, and hopefully we'll have a successful denning season this year.
Yes, thank you, Derek. Thank you, everybody that attended, and thank you to everybody that tried to attend the first meeting as well. It's really great to get everybody together and to be able to present some information about these Waterberg wild dogs. But yes, please keep your fingers crossed that we have a successful denning season with the pack in the next few weeks. We are watching their movements very, very, very closely and hoping that they decide to choose a den site soon. Mike, I see that your hand is raised if you want to go ahead.
Hi, Riley. Thanks very much. I just want to say thank you to you and Derek for the wonderful presentation. It was spot on. Johan, I just want to say thanks very much for what you just said. It goes a long way. Really appreciate the fact that you are quite happy to have the dogs in your farm. We'll definitely be in contact, and we'll definitely be pushing on your button, if we can call it that, for the next while. But again, just thanks to everybody that's involved. Yes, we were hoping for a lot more people, but I think the fact that the dogs moved out of that 6,000 hectare area, I think those guys on that side are relaxed now. But yeah, let's make this big success of this, and thanks to everybody.
Riley, I don't see, I cannot raise my hand, but can I just say something?
Yes, go ahead, go ahead.
It's Karen from Ledit. I just want to say that this is a great effort, to conserve an endangered species. And because of Ledit, I mean, our mandate is also to conserve. And it's sometimes difficult because, with landowners, it's to change their attitude and to see the positive side of these animals. So I think you've developed ways and means that people can use. So basically, there's no excuse to kill these lovely, these endangered species and to further just damage our image, our international image in conservation. So I think this is great. And I think the community can work together, and yes, congratulations on the efforts, and keep it going. We will be there to support you. Remember, we've got the different directorates, also the environmental compliance and enforcement. So in these cases, then that we can also support, where there are unfortunate killings, which we hope will not happen again. But yes, we are there to support you. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Karen. It is great to have your support and to have LIDEP Biodiversity support as well. Thank you so much for your thanks. Anybody else have anything before we sign off? Peter, are you waving goodbye or are you raising your hand? Goodbye. Okay, I'm going to close the meeting, but thank you all once again for attending. Oh, sorry, Peter, go ahead.
I said, I'm waving goodbye. Thanks very much, Riley. It was great.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Nadine. Okay, I'm going to sign off now, but thank you everybody who was able to attend. It was really, really great to present this data to you, and we will be in contact with everybody moving forward as well while the dogs are in the area and while the initiative is continuing to operate, and contact our landowners and to work with everybody and the Waterberg Wild Dogs. Thank you so much, and if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. I will send out my information to everybody that did attend this meeting so you can contact me. Have a great day all. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.